when I think about private equity, whether it's in our industry in energy and infrastructure or just in general, there's always common threads or common themes that private equity groups typically look for, right? One of them is always like ongoing revenue streams, right? Consistent revenue streams is probably the best way to put this. But our industry doesn't necessarily always have that, right? You might have HVAC companies that have service contracts, for example, but if we're talking about energy performance contracting, it tends to be very project oriented. So Ryan, just stay there for a second. Like when you think about private equity's involvement with some of your customers, what do you think they're seeing? Just kind of big picture, holistically, what do you think they're seeing in these types of companies in this market that makes it so attractive? Because you're right. We're seeing the same, I'm seeing the same thing as well, broadly speaking. There's a lot of private equity involvement and interest, a lot of money sitting on the sidelines still looking to get in.
Yeah, I think a little bit of it, there's a lot of blue collar industries and there's just a level of like professionalism that private equity could equip these companies with to then to bring to market. So how do you separate XYZ company versus Bob's electrical contractor that's been doing the same thing for decades, right? So I think it's the level of professionalism and sophistication is a word I'll use sometimes that private equity could kind of pour into, a local company at times.
Yeah, that's fair. Trevor, what about you? What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, and I would say it's probably not too far off from Ryan's. And on that private equity note, one of the reasons I believe our industry, our core industry, has been such a target for private equity is kind of twofold. First, our industry, at least the performance contracting industry, everybody would tell you they would credit themselves for coming up with the legislation in the 90s, right? But either way, whoever did it originally, we're coming up on that 35-year-old mark, right? Where a lot of the industry founders are on their way out. They're transitioning out. They're looking at succession planning. They're selling off businesses. So I think there's just in general, an opportunity for these private equity firms to enter now. But the other thing I would look at is a lot of the organizations we've partnered with over the last decade that I've been here have had really regional focuses, right? Something private equity is really good at, right? Buy an organization that's already profitable, look at their core skill sets, the foundation of their operations and implementation team, and be able to scale those into A, newer markets, B, newer geographies, right? And have the capital to be able to do that, the vigor to be able to do that, and we're seeing it pay off. Coast to coast, we're seeing organizations that are historically 2-3 state regional design build contractors now going on national platforms. So yeah. I think that's kind of a common thread we're seeing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I said, I was having a conversation earlier this week, reminiscing on the same thing where it's the number of like regional independent ESCOs that exist today. I think it was probably the lowest that it's ever been. We just typically don't see it, not anymore. There are the ones that are either getting acquired by a private equity group, acquired by a larger ESCO, merging with another ESCO. So it just seems like that environment of the small regional ESCO that's doing performance contracting in a couple of different states. I mean, it's really few and far between. So I'm seeing something very similar, Trevor. I want to go back to you, Trevor. You mentioned the maturity of the market, right? This ESPC model being around for over 35 years. So a very mature business model. What have you seen recently as far as like maybe the evolution of ESPC, right? Because all the ESCOs still exist. There's kind of a baseline model of energy and infrastructure and guaranteed savings and all of that, but I'm also seeing and hearing a little bit of a shift. So what are you seeing in the way of just kind of the evolution of ESPC?
Well, I would tell you, even at Nenni and Associates, we use it as a little bit of an umbrella term, right? There's been significant amount of branches off from different scopes and different conservation measures that might not be necessarily traditional performance contracting. So we're seeing that. And I think one of the biggest changes is a lot of these states that might not have as favorable legislation towards the procurement vehicle of energy savings performance contracting. They're looking at design build models or de-boom models, or even maybe it is taking a little bit of that ESPC play, incorporating it into a commercial industrial end user where it's technically a little bit more C-PACE, right? So we're seeing that industry that was born 30 years ago spurred off a ton of different offspring that are more applicable to different market verticals and different facility types. So that's been fun to watch is just kind of the transition of what we see now. We've almost had to oversimplify it to energy savings projects because there is such a diversification nowadays.